Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us for tonight's webinar. This webinar will be about positive reinforcement training with chimps, brought to you by our behavior coordinator, Kate Donovan. Kate graduated from Moorpark College with a degree in exotic animal training and management in 2016. Kate has been a caregiver with Project Chimps since 2017, and in October of 2020 was promoted to behavioral coordinator. Kate's educational background makes her uniquely qualified to assess the behavior of our chimps and create paths for improvement. Her hands-on behavioral training approach helps to reduce the level of stress put on the chimps. And without further ado, here's Kate.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Megan. Again, my name is Kate, and I'm the behavior coordinator here at Project Chimps. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about myself in a few minutes, but first, I just want to start out by giving you some details about Project Chimps. So in case you don't know, Project Chimps is a 236-acre sanctuary in the Blue Ridge Mountains, and we were created specifically to help these former research chimps. Our mission is to provide lifelong exemplary care to chimpanzees retired from research. And we've been transporting chimps from the New Iberia Research Center in Louisiana since 2016. We've transported 80 chimps, and we have 78 here with us today. This is a nice little overview of our property. You can see the villas around the outside. We have 4 villas and our mega villa chateau. And in the middle there is our 6-acre habitat, which is divided in half, so that each group rotates access. Hello. So every group of chimps lives in large villas. You can see our cedar tree villa there on the left, and that is a climbing structure being worked on the right in chateau. They live together in their family groups, and they have indoor and outdoor covered spaces. Every day, the chimps get 3 meals, a healthy variety of fruits, veggies, nuts, greens, basically anything that they could want. Every day, they get enrichment multiple times a day. That's Beverly showing off one of our enrichment spinners that they get, and Amy and Loretta on the right, checking out our man-made termite mount. So a little bit about me. I went to Moorpark College in California. I graduated with a degree in exotic animal training and management. I knew I wasn't cut out to be a veterinarian, but I still wanted to work with animals. So I stumbled upon Moorpark, which is literally going to college at a zoo. The program focuses on animal behavior, training, and husbandry. The video there is me training with our lion, Ira. I think I was working on rollover with him, which he does eventually. And there's a few other animals in the pictures that are at the program: serval, hornbill, an olive baboon, and a coyote. So before I came to Project Chimps, I did a number of internships and previous work experiences. So I started out at Southwick Zoo in Massachusetts with their group of chimps there. And from there, I went to Primarily Primates in Texas and helped out with their chimps. And I was also at the LA Zoo with their group of chimps. And then I was hired at the Wildlife Way Station and worked with the chimps there. And then I came to Project Chimps in 2017. So before we get into some of the finer details of training, I just kind of wanted to start with the basics. What is training? If you look it up in the dictionary, it'll say behavior modification brought about by direct interactions, but you can simplify that a lot. Training really is teaching. It's shared experiences and goals between a trainer and animal. And there's many ways to train, many philosophies behind training. Every behaviorist or trainer is going to do it a little different. But tonight I'm going to be talking about our methods and philosophies here at Project Chimps. And speaking of learning, this is Charisse doing a little bit of studying with her books. having a little snack. Until she sees me watching her, of course. So speaking of learning, there's 3 major types of behavioral learning and therefore teaching. The first is classical conditioning, which is pairing a signal with usually a food until the signal evokes the response of the food. Probably everybody knows about Pavlov and the dog with the bell. Pavlov would ring a bell immediately before serving the dog food. The sight of the food would cause the dog to salivate, and then eventually the bell itself caused the dog to salivate without any food present. This is an automatic response. The dog didn't choose to salivate, and that's classical conditioning. I used food as an example, but we are actually classically conditioned in all kinds of ways. If you go to a movie theater and as soon as you sit down, you immediately start craving popcorn, that is classical conditioning. If the telephone ringing gives you some anxiety because it's always somebody calling because they want money, that is classical conditioning. The sound of the phone evokes anxiety without any of the middle stuff happening yet. Second type of learning is observational learning, which is learning through observation and imitation of others. Obviously, we see this a lot in humans, but chimps learn this way too. And I'll talk a little bit about that a little later on. And finally, the one that we're going to concentrate on mostly is operant conditioning. And this is a type of learning where your behaviors are altered by the consequences that follow them. So much of our learning is operantly conditioned. We make choices about our future actions based on our previous experiences. So how does it work? Before we delve into the chimp aspect of it, I want to break it down in an example that is probably familiar to you. Let's work with the behavior of showing up on time for work. Let's say that you run an office and you have an employee who is constantly late. Let's say his name is Todd, and you happen to know that Todd loves coffee. So you need Todd to be at his desk ready to work at 9 a.m. You have 4 ways that you could deal with this problem using the principles of operant conditioning. So your 4 options. First, you have to decide if you want to increase Todd's behavior of being on time or decrease his behavior of being late. That sounds like the same thing, and it kind of is, but it's really about focusing on which specific aspect of the behavior you are going to try to alter. So if you focus on choosing to increase his behavior of being on time, that is called reinforcement. If you choose to decrease his behavior of being late, you're using punishment. So punishment can be kind of a loaded word. We all have connotations of what we think punishment means and what being punished is. In terms of operant conditioning, though, it's purely mathematical. Reinforcement just means increasing a behavior. Punishment just means decreasing. So remember that operant conditioning is all about choice. You can't physically drag Todd out of bed in the morning, put him in his car, and sit him at his desk. So you only have the power to add or subtract things from his environment to encourage him to make the choice that you want. If you choose to add something to Todd's environment, that's called positive reinforcement. And if you are adding something to increase his behavior of being on time. If you are adding something to decrease his behavior of being late, that is called positive punishment. And as his boss, you also have the power to take things away from his environment. So if you are removing something to increase his behavior of being on time, that's called negative reinforcement. Again, negative does not mean bad. It's literally just a subtraction sign. And if you are removing something to decrease his behavior of being late, that is negative punishment. So as I mentioned before, you happen to know that Todd loves coffee. So we'll use that as his reinforcer, which to simplify just means something that the one being trained enjoys. You also know that Todd doesn't like to work, obviously. So we'll use work as his aversive, which is something that he would try to get away from. So let's look at your options for getting Todd to change his behavior. When Todd arrives on time, he's given a free coffee. This is positive reinforcement because we added a reinforcer to increase his future behavior of showing up on time. When Todd is on time, he has one file subtracted from his workload. This is negative reinforcement because we subtracted an aversive to increase his behavior. Again, notice negative reinforcement is not the opposite of positive reinforcement. Negative reinforcement, it still involves reward. When Todd is late, he has an extra file added to his workload. This is positive punishment because we added an aversive to decrease his future behavior. We intend that he will choose to be on time in order to avoid extra work. And finally, when Todd is late, the coffee machine is removed from the office. This is a little dramatic, but it is negative punishment because we subtracted a reinforcer in order to decrease the future behavior of being late. Now, what studies have shown time and time again is that positive reinforcement is the most effective method of training. You can accomplish behavior with the other ones, but it can come at a cost. So if you're piling extra files on Todd and taking away his coffee machine at 9:01, he's probably not going to like you very much, and you'll have damaged your relationship with him. The same thing happens when you work with animals. So positive reinforcement is what we use with the chimps. The key is to make the one that you're training want to do the things that you want them to do. The behavior is more likely to occur if the person or animal has good feelings about it. Now that you've got a few of the principles down, let's talk about positive reinforcement training with the chimps. I can tell you that probably the question I get the most often is, what tricks do they know? This leads to a good conversation about how training has changed over the years. Because years ago, it was about doing tricks. For many chimps, this was their training experience. Things like riding a skateboard, bicycle, roller skates, unicycle, dressing them up in clothes, smoking. This chimp is singing the national anthem, circus acts, and again, more circus acts. So the difference is training back then was primarily for human entertainment, and that is not the case anymore. Nowadays, we say that magicians do tricks, animals do behaviors. So when we train now, it's for one of three reasons, none of which are for human entertainment. The first reason that we train is for physical exercise. We've trained a few chimps to, for example, like climb trees. We're doing, the challenge with Cassie right now, getting her to move around. So that's all training. The second is mental stimulation. Training's a fun puzzle for them to try to figure out. It's kind of like a game of them trying to work out what we're asking, and the process can be just as rewarding as the food reinforcement that they receive. And lastly is cooperative behavior. And this means training chimps to participate in their own healthcare. This makes it easier for the vet and the staff, but most importantly, it makes it fun and less stressful for the chimps. Now, before you can start working on a behavior you want, first you have to find a reinforcer, which is something that will make the chimp want to do the behavior again so that they get the reward. These are some of the most common food reinforcers we use: peanuts, juice, peanut butter, produce, and raisins. We always use extra treats instead of their meals, just to make sure there's no pressure at all to participate. It's entirely up to them. And something kind of interesting is that just because you think that something is rewarding, it doesn't mean it is. Only the one being trained can decide what is reinforcing. For example, in our Todd situation, it would have been very different results if Todd was a tea drinker who really liked to work. We would have had much different results trying to reinforce and punish him in the ways that we went over. So chimps can be very specific on what they're willing to work for. For fun, I went through and listed some of the chimps' likes and dislikes there. So peanuts is the one that we use the most often with the chimps. Ray is a big fan of peanuts. Roxy will eat peanuts in a scatter, but she doesn't like to train for peanuts. Juice is Rusty's favorite thing in the world. Neil won't even come over to you for juice. Leo loves peanut butter. He's a peanut butter monster. Armand, he'll just sit and look at you if you try to hand him some peanut butter. Produce, Bina will eat any produce ever, any fruit, but Hercules doesn't really take produce as reinforcement. Actually, Hercules a lot of times wants to be trained with attention. That's what he finds more reinforcing than food. So reinforcement doesn't always have to be a food. And finally, raisins. Rocco loves raisins. He does like a cute little bounce when he's getting his raisin reinforcement. But Mandy, she'll eat them in a scatter, kind of like Roxy with the peanuts, but she doesn't like to come over for them. So now that we got the basics down, let's put it into action. The behavior that we'll be going through is how to train for an otoscope, which allows us to look into their ears. This is a perfect example of how cooperative behavior works, because although you think of it as being a simple behavior, just to like peer into their ear, you would never be able to do it to an awake, untrained chimp. That's just not going to happen. So training allows us to make it fun and rewarding for the chimps while allowing us access to them that we wouldn't otherwise have unless they were sedated. So helping me out today is Jenny. She's a high-ranking female in Sterlene's group. She's very easygoing, loves to train, and her preferred reinforcement is peanuts. All right, so all of the chimps are trained to present each of their body parts. Not only is that a good way to be able to see their whole bodies, but it also serves as a basis for more advanced behaviors. Jenny is a pro at training. She already knows how to present her ear, but for the sake of example, I filmed the video as if I was teaching her. So I'll play the video and then we will go over what you see. Jenny, ear. Good girl. Ear. Good girl. So off camera, I'm giving Jenny the cue for ear, which is pointing at my ear and then pointing at hers. So a little observational learning happens there, like I mentioned earlier, because chimps are so smart that they can often figure out what you want just by us pointing to it on ourselves. So she puts her ear up to the mesh and I touch it with a popsicle stick. And then you hear a clicking noise, which is a little handheld device called a clicker. And that allows me to mark the precise moment that Jenny gets the behavior correct. And then, of course, she gets her reinforcement and you can hear her cute little chimp chomping on the peanuts. That's my favorite part. Now, if this was a new behavior for Jenny, we would stay on the step probably for a few days, maybe longer, depending on the chimp's comfort level and learning speed. A behavior should be like second nature to them before you move on to the next step. But we'll say we've been working with Jenny on this behavior for a week, and I feel like she's ready for the next step. At this point, I'm going to introduce a mock device I made to simulate the otoscope. This is because otoscopes cost a lot of money, and if the chimp manages to get hold of it during training, it would be an expensive mistake and could also be dangerous to the chimp depending on what it was they got hold of. We won't introduce the real device until the behavior is being perfectly performed. So a lot of chimps are nervous about novel items. They've never really seen anything that looks like this device. If I was working with a chimp like that, I'd have to slow this down even more, where I would literally just show them the device from far back and click and reward them for just looking at it calmly. And then I would move it like closer and closer as long as they were calm with it moving closer to them. And that's actually classical conditioning, which we also talked about, because eventually the new device will evoke the response of the food. So it's how you make something negative positive. Jenny, though, is laid back, confident, and she allows me to touch her ear with the device right away, even though she's never seen it before. So again, we would stay at this step as long as we needed to before we added in the next part. And the next part would be to hold still longer, because when it's the real otoscope, the vet is going to need some time to look around in her ear. It's going to take, 20, 30 seconds. So we train Jenny for that now so that it's all routine on the day that we do it for real. So I was holding the device to her ear for a couple more seconds than I was on the previous step. And I would just gradually increase that time that I'm holding it against her ear until probably 40 seconds. You kind of want to train for over the amount that you think that you'll need. So notice that Jenny pulled away the second time I asked her instead of waiting for me to release her with the click. She doesn't receive a reward, but she doesn't get any correction or punishment. We just move on. And the next time I ask her for the behavior, she offers it. So like I said, I'll just keep gradually increasing the amount of time until I click. And once it's up to the correct amount of time, Dr. Silver will come up with the otoscope and do the real thing. So that's kind of the building blocks of how you build the behavior. I also wanted to include some behaviors that we have trained already because they are fun to see and talk about. So this right here is Oscar getting a nail trim. That behavior is really useful. A lot of chimps, their nails get really long. And so if they are, scratching themselves or if they get in a fight, it's just good to have the nails clean and short. Oscar was really hesitant to learn this behavior at first, but he eventually came down and learned it after he watched everybody else get rewards. That's how a lot of them decide to participate in training. They see the other chimps getting the good stuff. So I started out training this behavior by asking for hand, getting him used to me touching his hand. The thing that is hardest to get the chimps desensitized to is actually the sound of the clippers. For some reason, that usually really startles them. So that step you take a little bit longer on typically. But now he's got it down like a pro and he has beautiful nails. This next one is Hercules, getting his teeth brushed. That one I'm actually really excited to get on film because up until that session, he had never actually let me brush his teeth. He did all the steps before it, but he never wanted the toothbrush to enter his mouth. He would purse his lips closed like a toddler when you try to brush their teeth. But that day, for whatever reason, he decided it was the day, and he let me get in there with the toothbrush and scrub his teeth. And the next step after that would be adding toothpaste. Which we have kid-friendly, yummy tasting toothpaste. Ray is a big fan of the toothpaste. Some of the other chimps take longer to get to like it, but Ray loved it right away. And then this final behavior is actually my favorite one that I've trained, and the one I think that probably comes in handy the most often. So this is going to be Jacob touching the laser pointer. I don't know if you can see it, but it's back on that blue barrel in the distance. There's a little green dot, and Jacob is just going to run over and touch the dot. Seems simple enough. Believe it or not, it's actually a hard behavior to train because chimps are too smart for it. You think it would be a really easy connection to make to touch the dot wherever it is, but they want to touch the actual laser pointer, or they cheat and they intercept the beam and the dot is on their hand or their lips, and they think that should get a reward for that. So getting him to go and touch the dot wherever it was took some time. And you can see Jacob out in the habitat now. He's very comfortable and very relaxed, but he didn't always used to be like that. So when his group first started getting let outside, Jacob was really nervous. He would get to the end of the tunnel and he would sit and he would kind of look up at the sky, and he might like lean out a little bit, but he wouldn't set foot outside. So he knew this laser pointer training behavior, and we decided to use that to help him get some confidence going out into the habitat. So we actually caught when he went out in the habitat for the first time on camera. So he runs out and he touches the post where the dot was, and he immediately runs back in. But that was like step one. That was the beginning of Jacob's now love for the habitat. And we got to use training to make it a really positive experience and to get him outside maybe sooner than he would have eventually done on his own. But like I said, now he's the king of the habitat. This habitat, or this training, this behavior also has another layer to it. Jacob will now, if you put the dot on an object, he'll pick it up and bring it back to you. So this comes in handy if like something falls into the enclosure, or they manage to get something away from you, like a juice cup or something, and you want to have it back to you. Jacob will retrieve it. So you probably can't see it, but behind Oscar there's a large stick, and I have the green dot on that. So Jacob is going to go bring it back to me. Now that stick was a little bit too big to fit through the mesh, but had it fit, he would have passed it all the way through. There's actually a few chimps that know this behavior, and it's really useful for chimps like to a lot of times put their blankets over the doorways so that you can't close the door during shifting to get in to clean their enclosure. They'll leave the blanket there so that you just can't close the door. So Jacob and a few other chimps in other villas are trained to go and get that behavior, or get that blanket and bring it back so that you can close the door and clean. Like I said, it just comes in handy a bunch of times. But Jacob is definitely the pro at it. So that is all that I have for you guys. If you have any questions, you can use the Q&A feature now, and I will pass it back to Megan.
Thank you so much, Kate. That was wonderful. Thank you for telling us a little bit more about your training and for sharing some fun stories about the chimps. And yes, if anybody has any questions, this would be a great opportunity to look down towards the bottom of your screen, and you'll see that little icon that says Q&A. If you have any questions, you can use that icon and you can submit those questions to us. You're also more than welcome to always send any questions that you have via our events@projectchimps.org email address. So Kate, what was one of the more challenging chimps that you have worked with?
It's hard to pick one. They tend to be challenging in different ways. I think just in general, the males in Kirk's group are a training challenge, just because, like I said, it's very important to find a reinforcer that the chimp enjoys, and those boys just don't seem to like anything. So it's hard. It's been hard to find a reinforcer that they are willing to like come up for. I've gotten after much trial and error. I think that dates have been a big hit with those boys. Also the mini box of raisins that I showed a picture of, like, but it has to be the whole box. They're not into the one raisin at a time thing. So yeah, finding reinforcers for them, because until you find something that is reinforcing, you can't even start training. So that is the biggest challenge that I've been dealing with as of late.
Nice. What percentage of our chimps have had your training?
100.
Nice.
Yeah, I've trained with every chimp. I go around to each villa every day, and train with as many chimps as want to participate. And I've definitely gotten to all of them. If there's like a behavior that's more medically necessary or it's priority, I'll spend a longer time in there working with those chimps to get them down. But yeah, I try to see every chimp every day.
Nice. Now, how have the chimps been trained to tell you if they have any pain or if something hurts or needs attention?
Um, they actually, so this is something that is a constant ongoing um, behavior to train. And we have, I call it show me your boo boo. So if they get like a cut or a scratch on them anywhere, I'll say, show me your boo boo, and they'll come up and show it to me. It takes a little while for them to catch on that that's what you're wanting. And then eventually they'll find like the oldest, tiniest scrape from 3 weeks ago and show it to you so that, they can get a reward. Jacob is notorious for doing that, but it's better that way than to have them not show us. So show me your boo boo is how we see like physical stuff on them.
Awesome. Now, when doing these behaviors for medical reasons, after they've been trained, do you still have to be present or are the vets able to replicate your behaviors and your training?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I actually work really closely with our vet, Dr. Silver, and she comes around with me several times a week, and she also trains. And so a lot of times we'll tag team something, and I'll work with the chimp, and while she does what she needs to do, so we'll have to train for like a two-person behavior. But yeah, Dr. Silver is very into training herself. So that's been really helpful. So I don't have to be there every time, but usually we kind of tag team those things.
Excellent. So here's a good one. Chimps imitate each other. So when you're training, do the chimps watch a successfully positive, reinforced trained chimp achieve his goal and do they learn from each other?
A lot of times they do, yeah. I think my favorite example of that is the one that comes to my head right away is that Bina, we needed to see in his mouth, and so I was getting him to stick out his tongue. And Jacob sat there and watched all these sessions, and then he would come over and push Bina out of the way to show his tongue because he saw Bina getting reinforcement for it. So they do stuff like that all the time when they figure out, oh, I can do that too, and I want a reward.
Nice. And on average, how long does it take for a chimp to learn a behavior?
That can vary a lot. So like you saw the thing I did with Jenny in that example video, we had never done that before, and Jenny just knocked it all out super quick. Another chimp would it could take weeks to get that far, depending on their level of like comfort or suspicion of novice devices, new things. So we have like Sky, for example, who's in Kareem's group. She is a very aloof, suspicious chimp. So that behavior would take weeks, if not longer. So it's actually really the most important thing that you can do for the chimp is always be aware of their comfort level and to never push past that. You always want them like at the threshold so that they are advancing, but they're not uncomfortable.
Now, how about retention of what you're learning or what you're teaching? Do the chimps sometimes forget behaviors and you have to reteach them?
Yeah, yeah, that happens. If a behavior hasn't been worked on for a while, um, then they don't do it the first time you ask. Usually, those sessions are much quicker because it's easier to help them remember a behavior that they already know um, than like train a new behavior. So generally, you don't have to start at like square one. You can start at like square two, then four, then six. It just goes a little faster to help them remember.
Nice. Now, is this common in your field? Are there a lot of other people that know how to do this type of training?
Yeah. So positive reinforcement training is like the way that is kind of the industry standard. Um, they Other methods used to be used. Training used to be a lot more punishment based and dominance based, and the industry as a whole has really moved away from that because positive reinforcement just works so much better. So this is generally the way that people are taught in my experience. When I went to school, that's what we did, um, because you get the behavior and you get to keep your relationship with the animal. Um, Whereas like the punishment methods, like I said before, you're potentially damaging your trust with them.
Nice. Now, do you ever limit the treats to prevent interfering with their diet? Do you worry about them overeating or getting too many treats?
Yeah, to some extent. So we have a nutrition um, committee. We have like nutrition oversight, and our vet oversees it. Um, Generally, like the chimps that maybe we're a little bit more worried about their weight, we'll do things like if we're training with juice, dilute the juice so that they're not getting full strength. As long as they still find it reinforcing, then we will look out for them that way. The vet is aware of any training treats that we use, and she's approved them all. So if anybody was getting too much, then she would step in and say, cut it back a little bit. That has never happened.
Nice. Now, do you have to train one behavior at a time, or can you train multiple behaviors at one time?
Um, when you're As far as going with one chimp, like if I was going to work with Tristan, just because that's who that picture is, and I was training her a new behavior, I would focus on that one behavior. I might ask her like a couple easy ones just because you always want them to be successful. So if they're learning a new behavior and they're having trouble with it, you want them to succeed. So then I might ask her like an easy one, so she can get a reward. But generally, when you're training a new behavior, that should be your focus. Training multiple new behaviors gets confusing, but I'll train different behaviors within a group. I'll train, this with Tristan and this with Sophia and this with Haley, in different sessions.
Nice. Now we have a chimp care volunteer commenting on a time that they witnessed you take a pea out of Jennifer's ear. Would you like to comment on that interaction? They said they were very impressed with your work.
Yeah. So that was Genesis, and that was actually where the otoscope behavior started. Is because Genesis does sometimes like to stuff things into her ears, and that was priority to train, was to get her to present her ear and allow me to pull it out. And I have like these plastic tweezers that I use, and she'll hold still and she'll let me pull it out, so that she doesn't have stuff stuck in her ears.
Nice. Now I have one more question. We have a few more that have come in. So if we did not get to your question, know that you can always email us at events@projectchimps.org. And the last question, Kate, do you have a favorite chimp?
I do have a favorite chimp. My favorite chimp since day one when he got here is Hercules. He's just the best ever. I just love him. We have, I think, a really like special relationship. That sounds corny, but that's how I feel. And he is definitely just the most special chimp that I've ever met.
Nice. All right. Well, again, thank you for all the questions that you have sent in. Feel free to email us any other questions you have. We'll take it to the next slide, Kate. And yeah, just a little fun fact, it costs approximately $22,000 per year to get each chimp everything that they need, from food, enrichment, medical care, and all of the different activities that we bring them. And if you enjoyed this presentation, first off, we hope that you'll join us for some of our other webinars. We will be doing different educational webinars the third Thursday of each month. You can always get on our website and register for the webinars ahead of time and join us here on Zoom. Otherwise, you can also catch us on Facebook Live. And if you did enjoy this program, it costs approximately $7 a day to feed one chimp and $3 a day to provide enrichment to one chimp. So for even just $10, you can provide all meals and enrichment activities for one chimp for one day. Might you consider an annual chimp sponsorship as a gift for $250 or monthly at $23? You can also get online and check out our wish list. And on our wish list, Kate has some special items that she uses for training. So if you enjoyed some of this presentation and are fascinated by it, you can get on that wish list and specifically pick out a few items that Kate can use for training, or maybe some of those rewards that we know the chimps love so much. And of course, feel free to get on our website to check us out for more information at www.projectchimps.org. Most importantly, thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you for our next webinar.